Idaho Housing and Finance Association has made this short video to introduce you to the Section 8 Voucher Rental Assistance Program. By providing housing to Section 8 participants as a landlord, you are helping Idahoans who need it most.
Low-income families, senior citizens, and people with disabilities. We will explain how Section 8 rental assistance works and give you some tips to make your landlord-tenant relationship a good one. Section 8 is a federal program of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. In your area, Idaho Housing and Finance Association, or IHFA, administers this program for HUD. People who qualify for Section 8 assistance must meet federal income limits to be considered very low income. IHFA uses federal money to pay a portion of their monthly rent, and it's paid directly to you, the landlord, at the first of every month. The tenant is responsible for paying the rest of the rent, generally 30% of their monthly adjusted income. IHFA qualifies a person for Section 8 assistance based on income and other programmatic requirements. It is up to you to do additional screening, which should be consistent with your current practice of screening all other tenants, and decide if they will be good tenants. Here's what one landlord suggests.
We have worked with Idaho Housing for many years and have had very good success with them. Just because a prospective tenant is Idaho Housing does not guarantee they will qualify for our rentals. We do the same background checks on voucher recipients as we do on those who are not on a voucher.
Remember, IHFA does not screen program participants' rental history. We screen specifically for program eligibility. Screening to determine their suitability as a renter is your responsibility. So be sure to check with previous landlords, check their rental history, and any references they give. You can make renters aware of the properties you have for rent by listing them at housingidaho.com, a free bilingual online listing and locator service. Many Section 8 participants look for housing at this website because it allows them to search for properties that accept Section 8 vouchers. You can get more information about listing your properties by visiting housingidaho.com or calling 1-877-428-8844, or you can list your property with the branch office. When a Section 8 recipient contacts you, they can show you a document that lists the bedroom size the family has qualified for and the expiration date of the document. The person will also ask you to fill out 3 documents if they are interested in renting from you. Completing these does not mean you have to rent to this person or sign a lease with them. It is just the first step in the rental process. The first form is a request for tenancy approval. Here, you list very basic information about the property, the contract rent for the unit, and who will pay the various utilities and supply various appliances. You also provide the current rents you're receiving for other comparable units, which demonstrates you are not charging the Section 8 participant more than the unassisted tenants. This form is also used to determine rent reasonableness, which we will explain in a minute.
The request for tenancy approval is a very important form. It helps us to determine the utility allowance for a specific unit. It tells bedroom size and the proposed rent. It also tells what type of utilities a specific unit has, gas or electric, and who pays for those utilities, the landlord or the tenant.
This information is important because IHFA uses what's called a payment standard to determine the amount of subsidy. A payment standard is a maximum amount IHFA can pay for rent and utilities based on unit size and the county where the unit is located. The amount is usually the same as HUD's fair market rent, or FMR, though a housing authority may set it between 90 and 110% of FMR.
A Section 8 renter is responsible for paying 30% of their adjusted income towards the rent and utilities for that unit.
The Housing Assistant Payment, or HAP, pays the difference between the contract rent and the tenant's portion of the rent, up to the payment standard. But anything over the payment standard must be paid by the tenant in addition to the 30% of their adjusted income. And remember, this figure that the renter is expected to pay must not be more than 40% of the family's monthly adjusted income if their gross rent exceeds the payment standard. Gross rent is the contract rent plus the applicable utility allowance based on the tenant-paid utilities.
If you want to rent to a Section 8 participant and their portion of rent and utilities exceeds 40% of their monthly adjusted income, you may have to negotiate the contract rent. The other documents you need to complete are a representative authorization form to authorize another party to conduct Section 8 business and sign paperwork on your behalf if you have a management company or some other individual you want to designate as your representative, and an additional unit information form, which provides IHFA with more unit details to use in determining rent reasonableness. Fill out these forms and return them to the prospective tenant. They will give them to the local IHFA office.
The sooner we get this form, the better. We need it in order to be able to schedule the inspection, and until the inspection is performed, rental assistance cannot begin.
After these forms have been completed and the process begins, you will also be asked by IHFA to complete a W-9 form. Your Section 8 renter should not move in until an IHFA inspection of the property has occurred and any items needing repair or corrections have been addressed. IHFA inspectors make sure the unit meets Federal Housing Quality Standards, HQS for short. Most of the repairs are common sense health and safety related items. If you decide not to make the repairs, the Section 8 leasing process stops here. If you are willing to make the repairs, you have up to 30 days to do so, and then have the unit re-inspected. Please remember, IHFA cannot make HAP payments on behalf of the renter until the unit has passed the HQS inspection. If you and the renter agree to an earlier move-in date, the renter is responsible for the entire rental payment until the property passes its HQS inspection and the lease has been signed. In addition to passing an inspection, before IHFA can approve a unit for the program, we must determine if the rent you are asking for your unit is reasonable when compared with other comparable unassisted units. This is the rent reasonable determination we mentioned earlier. Rent reasonableness is determined by comparing your requested amount to 3 other private unassisted units, taking into account the location, size, type, quality, amenities, facilities, and management and maintenance service. IHFA maintains a library of units available for rent in the communities we serve. We use this library to determine whether the rent amount being requested by the landlord is comparable to other rents in the area. The Rent Comparable Library is updated annually. With the inspection and rent reasonable determination behind you, it is time to sign the lease with the renter and a contract with IHFA. You may use your own lease to rent to a Section 8 participant. However, IHFA must review it to ensure it meets certain HUD criteria. HUD requires your lease to comply with state law and requires the following information as well: the names of the owner and tenant, the address for the unit, who is responsible for payment of utilities and supplying appliances, the amount of the monthly rent, the term of the lease, initial term, and any provisions for renewal. HUD requires that the initial term be for 1 year. IHFA has a model lease available if you would prefer to use it. Additionally, there is a HUD tenancy addendum that must be made a part of the lease. The contract between you and IHFA is called the Housing Assistance Payment Contract, or HAP contract.
The Housing Assistance Payment Contract is a contract between IHFA and the landlord. It lists the initial HAP amount and the utility information, as well as owner and IHFA roles and responsibilities. It is a binding contract, so be sure to read it carefully before signing.
The lease and contract are initially for a 1-year time span and then may convert to a month-by-month basis. During the first year of the lease, the tenant is not allowed to move except in extreme or extenuating circumstances. After that, they may move with a 30-day written notice to the landlord with a copy to IHFA, unless otherwise indicated in their lease. Since these renters are very low income and the tenant portion is subject to change, you may not charge first and last month's rent as a deposit, but you may collect a security deposit from the renter, consistent with what you charge other unassisted tenants. It must be fully refundable if the rental unit is left in good condition at move-out. Normal wear and tear are expected. You can also charge a separate pet deposit. If you're ever concerned about the condition of your unit, you can request IHFA to perform a special inspection. In fact, so can your renters. However, remember, IHFA has the authority to enforce HQS and address violations with you or the tenant, but the tenant is responsible for any damages that occur in the unit.
We do on-site annual inspections, but we do have special inspections that we do at the request of a landlord or of a tenant. Sometimes landlords have issues with the tenant keeping their property up. Sometimes tenants have problems with the landlords doing basic maintenance and repairs on the unit. They both put in a written request to have me do an on-site special inspection. I go out to the property, I assess the problems. If they are deemed HQS deficiencies, I will then write up a letter for the landlord to make those necessary repairs or for tenant-caused damages. If they are not repaired, then it can be grounds for termination of their assistance.
When renters call with any safety-related request, it is incredibly important to handle it promptly and to document every step of the process. When you were called, when repairs were made, and what was done. Take photos, keep receipts for the labor and materials involved, and ask the renter to sign a paper saying the problem was remedied to their satisfaction. All these steps are for your own protection as well as the tenant's. If the family composition changes, the renter must notify both you and IHFA before the change occurs. The renter needs your written permission to add another member to the household, and IHFA requires a copy of your letter granting this permission. Here is what renters are told.
Federal rental assistance is determined by the number of people in the household and the income in that household. So anytime there are changes, we need to be notified immediately. If those changes include the addition of new household members who are over the age of 18, permission must first be given through IHFA prior to them moving into the unit. Those new household members need to come into our office, sign the required documentation, disclose sources of income, and provide us with copies of their photo IDs. We also require copies of Social Security cards for everyone being added to the household. At this time, the landlord has the opportunity to approve or deny the new household members. Landlord approval is given when a written statement is submitted to our office granting permission for them to move into the unit. These new household members will go through the same eligibility criteria as the original household members. We will do income verifications and criminal history checks where we will be screening for violent criminal activity, and drug-related activity. So, you can see that it's very important that we be notified immediately if there are any changes in the household.
Your written permission as landlord is very important when anyone is added to the household, and IHFA takes these changes seriously when they go unreported. Program participants risk their assistance being terminated for noncompliance if they fail to report changes in the household composition. Every year there is a recertification of both the renter and the rental unit. 60 to 90 days before the anniversary date of the lease and contract, the property will be re-inspected to ensure it still meets federal HQS standards. The tenant is also asked to come to the IHFA office for a recertification meeting to update their income and family information. As the landlord, you are under no obligation to renew the renter's lease, but you are required to give proper notice to the renter and IHFA about your intentions. At move-out, you have 21 days to return their security deposit or explain in writing why the deposit was not refunded with an itemized list of repair expenses. Here is what Idaho Legal Aid tells renters who have questions about what is normal wear and tear.
Under Idaho law, you as a landlord have 21 days to return the security deposit of your tenant, or 30 if provided by the lease. You may retain monies out of that security deposit for damage. Damage includes holes in walls, stains on carpet, and things of that nature. You may not retain amounts out of the deposit for normal wear and tear, such as painting, cleaning, things of that nature.
Idaho Legal Aid says it's a good idea to videotape the rental unit or take photos at move-in and move-out to document its current condition. Also, take before and after photos of any repairs you make. The legal aid staffers get lots of renters' questions, especially when they're faced with eviction.
During the term of the lease, you must have good cause to terminate the tenancy of your tenant. At the end of a lease term, you must give your tenant 30 days notice in writing if you wish to terminate the lease. If your tenant wishes to terminate the lease, he or she must give you a 30-day notice in writing. If your tenant has violated the lease, you must give your tenant a 3-day notice in writing that he or she has violated the lease and the violation, such as non-payment of rent or a noise violation. If it's curable, you must also state that they have the right to cure the violation.
And 3-day notices do not include the day you served them the notice, weekends, or holidays. A couple of other important notes. Unless it is an emergency, you can enter a rental unit for inspection or repairs only after giving reasonable notice and at reasonable hours.
If you're a landlord and you want to inspect your tenant's apartment or make repairs, you need to give reasonable notice at reasonable hours that you want to make those repairs or to inspect. At least give 24 hours notice in writing, or at most, and better, give 48 hours. For example, if you have a single mother with children, it's not reasonable to do an inspection at, say, 11 p.m. at night. That's just not appropriate and it's not reasonable.
Most landlord-tenant law enforces common sense and common courtesy, and it all starts by getting everything in writing, from the lease agreement to the deposits to any changes or requests either party wants to make. Getting along with your tenants sure makes it a lot easier to be a landlord. Finally, we asked a couple of landlords who have Section 8 renters for their thoughts about the program.